Here.
Keep that. Hold on.
Move to the middle. I can sit over there.
Welcome, everyone. We will call this meeting to order. This meeting is the first 2015 meeting of the newly seated City of Topeka Council Economic and Community Development Committee. I'm Karen Hiller, Deputy Mayor, and as the senior person on this committee, I'm calling the meeting to order. With me are
Brendan Jensen, District 6.
Jonathan Shum, District 4.
And staff.
Corey Wright.
Rochelle Vega Rotana.
Thank you. Our first order of business is to elect a chairperson for the committee to get started.
I'd like to nominate Councilperson Hiller, Deputy Mayor Hiller, I'm sorry.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. I will accept that. I have worked on this committee before, but as the senior person, and since you both are new, I will be happy to do that this season, but study up.
Yes, ma'am.
There'll be a new season coming. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Moving along, we have an inter-year housekeeping item to do, and that is to approve the minutes of the last meeting of last year's committee, which was on January the 9th. We've been advised by the Assistant City Attorney Feeney that when we transfer years like that, that the new committee can adopt those minutes. They've been out, they've been reviewed. I would entertain a motion to adopt them.
I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Move to approve the January 9 minutes as written. Seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, now we will move into the 2016 Social Services and Contracted Services item. We are to discuss an established process for how we're going to handle it this year. So hopefully people who are in attendance got the agenda and know that. And the first order of business is to review the applications. Again, how we're going to process those applications, including determining whether we're going to engage any experts to help us do this. Just so it's clear for those who don't have an agenda, we will then finalize scoring, and Corey has brought us a proposal or a couple of alternatives, I'm not sure, on how we might begin to take the scoring and develop our recommendation for the council. So, Corey, you want to take it from there and walk us through some clarifications?
Sure. So staff review committee consists of myself, Rochelle Vega Rotana, Sasha Stiles, and Nikki Lee. Reviewed all 34 applications and gave them a score in each of the categories that were approved by the ECD committee last year, I suppose. And we have those scores that I believe I sent to you, but I did print a copy if you'd like a hand copy.
I think we all, do you need one? Okay.
I have it.
He's got them online.
Everybody have it? Okay. And we have those sorted by different categories depending on how you want to proceed today.
Okay. In terms of the review and the scoring then, we may need to, this is the first time we've been through it with new people on the committee, so we'll be probably stumbling a little bit, but getting through it.
Okay.
One of the things we need to do is make sure that everyone on the committee is either comfortable with the scoring or has an opportunity to ask questions about the scoring. And I'm thinking that maybe we need to have you well, let's check with committee members now. I asked to make sure that you reviewed at least a handful of the applications. Do you expect to have some questions about process and scoring?
Not that
staff?
Not that I haven't already had addressed at this point, at least.
Okay.
Process.
as you look, I mean, any answer is okay. I think what's important, one of the, just for some background, this committee was created to establish and go through a new process to work on social service applications, because the council had in the past been a little uncomfortable with the fact that in many ways they felt like no one was reviewing the applications in terms of performance and content. And there had been some years where that was happening. When the council had at one point dropped using a third-party review committee, they were not real comfortable with either taking time in the council's budget process to have, in effect, a hearing process with every social service agency, or failing that, have in the full council meeting all the way at the end of the line a process with every social service agency. So the concept of putting this in a committee of council members was to make sure, was to work hard at upgrading the caliber of the applications, as well as to ensure that there had been some counterpoint, that the committee of three of the council could assure the full council and the agencies that the proposals had all had due diligence applied, that there was a meeting of the minds about how the scoring occurred, and as well as how the allocation process occurred, so that we were fully knowledgeable and could stand behind any decisions that went forward, with the idea then that there would not be hearings in the course of the city council's full budget committee or the full council, that the recommendations from this committee would solidly move forward. So it is imperative on us to not just, if you will, rubber stamp, but to be certain that we've asked our questions, if we have any, and have worked the process. So. With that, Jonathan, do you have some questions at some point? Not yet. Okay. And I do have some questions about, particularly just reading through the ones that I did, issues of rankings on outcomes and on some performance factors. They may balance themselves out in terms of what the net scores would be. So for me, I'll be interested in having us look at the allocation process first and then back into how we want to handle questions.
Okay.
With that, then, they've done some preliminary scoring, but as you all know, we have not released that yet because we need to look at it and get familiar with it. Do you want to talk about your proposals for how we, maybe explain to the rest of the committee how we came up with the funding grid, the different buckets of the different types of agencies, and then go from that to how you would suggest we do allocations?
I do have a sheet here that is, as you requested, broken up into categories for the social services. So I'll hand this out to you.
Okay.
So we have one scenario, and I just want clarification. Do you want to start with contracted services or emergency aid or social services?
Well, just to clarify again, I know you've had at this point, a couple of private conversations. I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Sure.
And basically, we have three categories of services that we are funding in terms of dividing up this book of alphabetical applications. And that is contracted services, which are services that are meeting a specified need of the city. And there are how many of those, Corey?
7 contracted services.
7 contracted services. And are they grouped on this sheet then?
They're grouped on another sheet.
Oh,
I can
okay.
hand out. The emergency aid being underneath that, but they're on that sheet.
Okay. So the contracted services, there are 8, and they are at the top of this, what says page 3 on it, correct?
Yes.
So they're contracted services, and then there are 3 agencies that are classified as emergency aid.
Yes, and there's 7 contracted services.
I'm sorry, 7, okay, and 3. And then the big page is the prevention and counseling services.
Correct.
divided into the categories. Did you all get the sheet that looks like this in the mail? Okay, these match up then. So these are divided into aging, they're not in the same order, okay. Aging, medical, youth. Are you able to follow which are which? Okay.
Those are sorted by category and then by their ranking within that category.
Okay. The language services, there is one grouping, okay, two, right, El Centro and Community Action. Mental health / neighborhood is the breakthrough group,
Yes.
okay. And what's the classification then for, oh, clothing, I see now, okay. I see them on there. Okay.
Okay.
Yep. And thank you for that. We can decide how we want to do the process, but doing them by their major groups may be helpful to us. Go ahead.
Okay, staff had just one option this year, and hopefully conversation will opt another option. We decided to try using the 2015 allocation and giving a 5% increase to people who scored 90 or above, 4% to 80 and above, or 80 to 90, 3% above 70, and 2% above 60, and 0 to 59 or below on their percentage ranking. We felt that without those rankings there, we're capturing in the outcomes, which is what we're focused on observing, and we certainly couldn't use the 2016 request because almost all agencies asked for considerable more money this year.
Do you have that recommendation printed? I wasn't writing very fast.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I think I do. Yep. This one's specifically for social services, but I have them in the others.
Okay, so the formula's in here, but the formula was
90%, hold on one second. 5% to people that scored above 90%.
Is
Or-
that at 90% or above?
90 and above, yes. And then 4%, 80 to 90, or up to 90. And then 3% from 70 up to 80. And 2% 60 up to 70. And then no increase for 59 or below. If with this option, we'd have one agency not receiving funding and one agency losing a substantial amount of money, but all other agencies would get at least what they received last year, plus some.
just to throw out to my colleagues, and you can help me out, Corey, with what had been considered in the past. One of the, when this whole process was discussed, and forgive me everybody because this is new information for me as well, was discussed was that the city wanted to target its dollars where they were most needed, and that one of the options in last year or the year before was to simply take a 60% cutoff and drop agencies off, and then fund adequately, arguably, the or more generously, the services that were above that threshold. And again, this is point counterpoint at this point. And another thing that was discussed in terms of creating this new system one of the things the council had been uncomfortable that it had done was just notch up a percent regardless of almost anything at that point, but except being there and turning in the application. When you and I went over this, we didn't really have a cost effectiveness metric in the scoring. I just want to throw that out to you all. I mean, last year when the 2015, the first time that we ran through, the committee ran through the cut based on scores, there were some that got cut substantially. What was it that happened when the full council put money back? It evened them up?
It gave them the percentage of the request last year. So if they requested 20,000, they got, and they scored a 60%, they got 60% of that 20,000, and they were funded at that level.
Okay. And on up.
Correct.
So it was based on a percentage of their request.
Yes, which certainly wouldn't work this year based on the
Well, it would
increase.
work if there was a floor, which had been discussed as one of the processes.
Last year, were there any agencies that weren't able to perform the work because they didn't have enough to get the program off the ground with giving them a percentage of what they asked for, or did everyone have a sufficient enough buffer to perform the work even with what the percentage they got from what they asked?
Yeah, they all used their funds.
Okay.
There were some that came through in the comments here that, you know, if it was emergency aid, they could only give out what they had money for instance.
Sure.
With counseling, it varied a little bit. You know, we certainly heard from some agencies that, one that I'm thinking of, but I'm sure there were more that had very small budgets, that when they got cut because of how their proposal was written, it was a hardship on the agency. Part of the process was to require, no matter what somebody knew about the agency or what they felt like in their heart, was that the proposal needed to be performance-based and well-written.
Yeah. Well, and that's the struggle with funding panels in general. I mean, all of these agencies are excellent agencies and they do very hard work, but from where we sit, we have to make business decisions and our feelings can't get in the way, and that's tough to do. So we'll make it, we'll do it right, but just be cognizant of the fact that we're not allowed to let our emotions get in the way of any of this stuff. We have to look at the numbers, we have to look at return on investment, and make sure that the money we invest in these agencies and that they can then in turn invest in our community will give us some sort of dividend or payoff in the future.
Along those lines, I'd like to suggest that we consider self-identifying any relationships we may have with any of these organizations. For example, as a foster parent, I've worked with KCSL, and I'd like that to be public knowledge before we make any decisions.
Sure.
So perhaps that's a recommendation for this year, for next year, that any council members serving do self-identify for full disclosure to the public, any relationships they may have with any of the people asking for, organizations asking for grants.
Sure.
That's a good point. You as well?
Yes, I will, see on my list here, I work extensively with the United Way and with Community Resource Council, and I don't, can we make the type any smaller?
We can.
Fabulous. I think that's it. Yes. There we go. 2. However, I'm confident that will not get in my way of making an objective, fact-based decision based on numbers in business.
Okay. You might, we might just for, because you all are new, disclose experience that you've had in going through these processes before, just so we get to know each other as a committee.
Okay. Well, so I have sat on a funding panel through CRC years ago, and then I worked for about 18 months with United Way. I was their Director of Information Technology, and they do a very similar funding process with panels, and it's all outcome-based reporting there. So I'm somewhat familiar with how outcome-based reporting and that sort of thing is generally intended to work.
I've served on a board for Project Belong, which is an adoption advocacy group, but less experience than you've had.
Okay. Because one of the things that's been hard that's often new to people who haven't been involved in those processes, and the agencies, based on their involvement, have really some struggled with, is the whole issue of outcomes, making sure that there is a solid statement about outcomes, that it's not a product, it's not whether people like the agency and are happy to have the agency there, but it is that there is a need is well described, and then there are outcomes that are measurable that show that the need is being addressed.
Well, at the end of the day, we are responsible to our constituents for how we deploy these funds. So if we're not able to go back to them and definitively say, we took this money you gave us, and instead of fixing potholes, we invested in the future of our community, and we expect to see this return in, a given period of time, we have to be able to do that. And so in everything we do, we need to make sure that what we're doing is in the best interest of our community now and laying the foundation for the future.
Right. So that's a lot of information, and a big responsibility that we have. So we need to consider whether we would go with the staff's recommendation on how to do allocations as well, and then sort of back into how we want to go about next steps.
Deputy Mayor, if I may.
Yes, absolutely.
On the contracted service side, I just wanted to let you know that added up to $295,784.81, which is slightly less than the $300,000 that you originally. So
Thank you. Give us
slightly
all
less.
of those. That's good.
Yes.
So 300,000 was allowed, and it was 295.
784.81
Okay.
is how it was broke out. And that would be using the same formula.
Oh, using your
Yes.
formula. How did the other ones come out?
The other one, I think
Just so you know, in the sheet for the split between emergency aid and preventive, it has a 25-75 split, but a plus or minus in it, so that if it didn't come out exactly right, you didn't have to mess with that.
social services was, altogether was $469,999.58. With the emergency aid. I'll have to pull that out. Sorry, I'll have to pull that out.
So the 469,999 is what was budgeted for it, or?
For all of social services, including
Oh.
emergency aid, so I would need to then add the emergency aid allocations and see if we fit the 75-25.
Yeah, well, 25% of 470 is pretty easy, maybe.
Along those lines, if we do go with option one, I believe we need to lower the minimum that was approved by the last meeting. I think that was set at 10,000. We've got, by my count, 7 allocations that would be under the 10,000 mark.
Thank you for pointing that out, because we addressed that last year. And the reasoning behind, historically behind the 10,000 minimum was that we wanted, the council at the time wanted to be making an investment that was substantial enough, it was substantial to the agency, and that also merited the amount of staff time for monitoring in terms of cost effectiveness. So, 7?
7.
Is this? I see.
So the total emergency aid using that same criteria would add up to 48,917.80. And
but the formula at 25% would indicate that 117.5 should be allocated to emergency aid. Correct?
correct.
Which means that the other one's going to be high, too high.
If we stuck with the 75-25. Mhm. You can see on if page 2, one of the emergency aid providers did not score so well, which is where the decrease is happening on the emergency aid side.
And, you know, back to what the committee considered in a prior year, if there was a 60% score threshold, takes care of a lot of that, if this group chose to go that way. It is because of this dilemma that making sure we are comfortable that the scores are sound becomes more, more important. Not that we have to redo it, we just need to be inside it and know.
I mean, based on what I've seen in the process now, I'm fairly comfortable with the way it works, so. I mean, it's sort of a harsh reality, but if you were unable to perform the work effectively or didn't score well, then unfortunately, that's just the nature of the business.
But it still funds them at it funds everybody, just almost instead of perhaps more adequately funding those that are performing more strongly.
I have a concern on the organizational leadership criteria. Some of these organizations would be smaller, and some of them would be entirely volunteer-based. So to apply criteria based on what volunteers they have concerns me, that a smaller organization or volunteer organization could be unfairly knocked based simply on who they have volunteer. It's not like they have a way to bring in volunteers that meet certain criteria. They go with what they have and who they have.
You know, we may need to back through and explain these criteria on the grid, because I'm not sure, because organizational leadership on this one with just 5 points has to do with your board composition.
Yes.
And purposefully, there were only 5 points for it anyway, but to drive a goal that the committee and council had in the past, that it be a diverse and representative of the community and be so described. But in the total of 95 points, if you could get points on it, but if somehow you had all men or all women or something like that, it was not gonna, the 2 points shouldn't be significant.
Well, in
was the
this
idea.
case, there is one organization that received 0 points for that, that's sitting at a 78.9%. And based on the funding level we're looking at, that makes a difference in funding if they're above 80% or if they're below 80.
Sure.
And that's my concern.
And did you have time to go through and see exactly where their weaknesses were yet on that score?
Not beyond seeing they had a 0 for
Okay.
instead of 5, so.
Because that score is a composite that has levels in it. You got the scoring criteria from staff, I think, that has to do with the diversity of the board and the attendance at board meetings. Yeah, that's it.
And that one.
Do you want staff to run through the criteria for that one in particular? Okay.
Okay, so on the org leadership, 1 point was given for each of these. At least 15% is made of racial or ethnic minorities, is less than 70% of one gender, meets regularly over 65% attendance, and has a healthy mix of needed skills and resources.
And that's just, that was
If they
a
met,
nonprofit board to.
sure. If they met 3 of the 4 criteria, they got 3 points, and if they had less than 3, they got 0 points on that.
And Jonathan, I would agree that it is a concern. However, on the nonprofit boards I sit on, that's one of the things we're charged with is properly staffing our board with resources that we need. So, I do agree that it's tough to discount them for that, but a healthy board is required to make an organization run appropriately and properly and even to execute some of this work. So if that's something they need to go back to the drawing board and work on, then that's something they need to get done. It's tough, but, and I've been on organizations where we've had to cut the board and start over because we had the wrong mix, we had the wrong skill set, and it's tough, but that's what you got to do to make good change and make positive things happen in the community.
On this grid, if I can, on the very first section where it says city priorities, that was a little confusing if you were going to try and tie it back to the applications. That basically ties back to the need section on the application. And so when you take 15 points for need, 15 points for the outcomes being clear, which they needed to describe, but we have to make sure they really are good outcomes, reasonable outcomes. And then even just skipping forward, the outcomes from prior grants at 20 points. Right there, you've got, what's that, 50 points on just our outcomes and performance, and there are details from there. But in the past, the idea was that the board was important, but it wasn't weighted like the program information was. And even 10 points for where it says there. Most of these scoring categories come out of the submission itself. There are 2 that do not, and that is the effective management. Is that right, Corey? The 10 points?
So, pardon me, give me a second.
Which has to do with turning in your grant documents on time and your reports and your documents are correct and turned in a timely manner.
That's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's not so, because it's the past grant administration, that's the 10 points on that, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And I'm sorry, remind me again, how long was the RFP out before it was due?
30 days.
Okay. So conceivably, somebody would have had time to make changes if they needed to before the final submission was in, having known the criteria.
Correct.
Okay.
They were all given this score sheet as well with that
okay.
RFP,
Okay.
so they knew exactly what they'd be scored upon. Additionally, we had a workshop that went over all this
Oh, fabulous.
application.
And they could have one-on-one coaching from you.
Yes.
Well, about the only thing we didn't do was provide a grant writer.
Well, again, it concerns me on the organizational leadership. According to this, 5 points if at least 15% is made up of racial or ethnic minorities. And in all due fairness, we would fail that test right up here.
Agreed.
So for a smaller volunteer organization who is taking every good volunteer they can get, that's a concern, because that's 2 points between.
I agree, but board recruitment is critical, and that's something that you control on your own, whereas we up here are elected by the people in our community, so we have less control over our makeup than does a board. I will agree, though, it is tough to go out and recruit some of those folks, but at the same time, that's to reach different parts of the community, you need different people with different backgrounds, and that's why it's crucial that you have proper board makeups when you're executing work, especially on a citywide endeavor.
We did get some concern about that last year. The scores are much better this year than they were last year, and people went out and worked on that. Something, just to put this series of meetings where we do the grant allocations in some perspective, we do, that's the first order of business in terms of the social service grants for the ECD committee when it is new in May. We will finish that process as soon as we can. If we think we need more time, we can give it to ourselves, because the recommendation for the dollars has already gone into the staff, and if we change it by the time we get done, we'll still be well in the middle of budget process, and I would argue that it's okay, because seeing that we are not meeting until now and the theoretic deadline is next week, it's pretty tight. Then what happens is we see how these allocations are set as, in effect, tentative allocations, but they are a full final recommendation from this committee to the board of the full council. Assume if the numbers come through from the council as recommended, those allocations are final and go out. If for some reason those numbers are different, then we reconvene in August to make adjustments. Then in December, we reconvene on this subject, whatever else we've been assigned, and look at the process itself, what the scoring was, what the RFP said, how the process went, and either leave it the same or make some recommendations for revisions for the future year, just as last year's group did in January. So there will be time, if you have concerns about any elements of this process is what was scoring and application is what we are charged with allocating against at this time.
Thank you.
This is the first meeting. Obviously, the proposal has some flaws with our policies, so we probably can't go forward with it that way. It's a lot to cover. We do have a second meeting set this week for Thursday morning. If people want to sort of ponder some of this before we go forward, or if you're ready to work at least the allocations proposal today and move forward. I am flexible with either, because I think it's a very important responsibility. The agencies are all doing important work for a lot of people, and whatever decisions we make will be important. We do have to make them, however, because the agencies need to know.
For clarification, do we need to reduce the floor on the minimum to 5,000 in order to proceed?
We would have to create an exemption to the charge that we were given, yes. And that's why I explained to you the reason for it. That was debated at some length, was refreshed in those January minutes that we just approved.
Do we need to go down to 5,000 or is 750 sufficient?
I think we'd have to go down to 6,000.
Okay.
Yep, you've got one that's,
Well, but this, we're just making an exception for these particular applications. We're not changing the general policy, correct?
right. Although it certainly would be a testimony, you know, that there was a determination when this was taken on. The group did that last year too, I think, didn't we? Didn't we have to do that to, yep. And so if the group met it, that's why. And our recommendation to the council, if we were to suggest a recommended allocation set that was contrary to what the council adopted as our guidelines, we would have to include that.
Changing that standard won't affect the current budgeting that you've done, will it?
What was this?
So
I'm sorry.
if we
what was-
lower the standard to 5,000 or 6,000, that won't change the first option for allocation, will it?
The one agency would be unfunded, the next agency would only receive 6,187. So if we
Okay.
locked it at 6,000, we'd be fine there.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't change it because you ignored it when you
Yeah.
did this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This
It's a
recommendation
scenario.
would be more, quite different if
Right.
so if we stuck with it and used the same theory, then what would happen is we'd drop anything under 10,000 and it would push the others correspondingly up.
Yeah, you could use the difference and allocate that based on percentages through the other agencies. We can work something like that up if that's what you choose.
Well, perhaps we should,
But it would knock all the ones under 10,000
Yeah.
out.
I mean, I'm inclined to fund them if they can do equitable work for below the standard. I agree with you, Mr. Shelman, that if indeed they can do work for that amount, then we should give them the opportunity. However, the idea, like Deputy Mayor Karen said, is that we really need, the idea is not to have tons of little tiny grants going out there that can't have much impact. We have a huge needle to move in this community, and throwing rocks where we need to throw boulders is not going to make a sufficient dent in our problems.
I would point out that of the 6 out of the 7 are rated a 15 on city priorities. And so I too would be uncomfortable just cutting them out altogether.
Yeah, just jettisoning them. Well, and seeing as the current model includes them, I'm inclined to leave them in, so.
But understand that there's a threshold. They didn't even get considered if they weren't in the city's priority buckets. The rating of 15 is how well they describe their need, that they adequately describe the need in the community.
Okay.
And having kind of spot checked some of these, I would argue that well, for most of them anyway, the need is there. It may not have been described very well in terms of the points that they got. So that's another challenge in this process. And that's where the issue of adding, I mean, an expert isn't going to, adding experts or third parties isn't going to improve the way an application reads. But if there was a choice to bring them in to evaluate priorities.
All of those agencies below 10,000, they performed work last year, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The agencies that were below 10,000 on their applications, they were awarded funds last year, correct?
We had some. Yeah, there were some that were below 10,000 last year.
And the ones that were below 10,000 performed adequate work given the amount of money they were given?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. I mean, so that essentially proves it's possible. I'm all for saving money where we can.
Well, I mean, let me look real quick. Some of them were dinged on their scores because they didn't do good grant reporting.
Yeah.
So there are various criteria that are considered. And again, the decision to use the scoring was they'd add up. Some people might be strong on some and not on others. And so,
And Chair Hiller, if I understand correctly, last year, it was suggested to have a 60% cutoff.
that was one of the models that was looked at, even from the beginning, I think, Corey, was it not?
Yeah, we had 3 options last year, a little harder this year with not being able to use last year's option of straight percentage of what they requested, since they all requested
If we stuck,
significantly more.
if we stuck with that, would we be able to, the numbers look at first glance that we'd be able to fund those above 60% that are currently under 10,000 with at least 10,000? Is that an option?
We could.
We can certainly work it out.
We could sure, one of the things would be if we want to leave today and ask Corey to work up a couple of options so we can see how they look, that certainly could be one thing we could ask her to do.
So can you repeat that? Let me know.
Moving any organization that is currently above 60% to the 10,000 mark so that we stay at that minimum, and also honor the 60% mark as previously suggested. Is that a fair representation?
I see what you're saying.
That's an option to make the allocations, so.
The only caveat there is then we're giving somebody more money than they need. Is that necessarily a good investment?
Well, we don't have to do that. I mean, nobody asked, I see, because you went back to the 2015 allocation.
Right. Which we would still be doing with the 5%, 4%, 3%, blah, 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 correct?
Yeah. I mean, when I read through these again this year, a weakness in the scoring or the process is that in terms of budget and cost effectiveness, if we really didn't want to just throw percentages at folks, we have to do more work, I guess. We had a couple of very weak applications in here, and so just a formula doesn't allow you to drill in and say, maybe this is really problematic. We need to pull that out and look at it. We also had we've got some applications in there that where there was a question about duplication of it was under duplication, I believe, where people scored okay, but what I'm saying is that they're, in terms of the experts that are outside,
Agreed.
In that industry, people had been looking at whether the service that they were providing really could be provided by an outside entity at less money, and they didn't mention that. They just talked about what a good job they were doing, and nobody was doing it like they did. So. If we're going to drill into those sorts of conversations again, pulling in, you'd mentioned how you'd work with people at United Way. That I'm not saying absolutely how we have to do it, but there are issues there, and the council really did want to make sure that we were funding viable
operations. Yeah. So what is the process if we agree to fund someone and part the way through the year they're unable to provide reporting or they're unable to actually meet outcomes? Do we then have to meet and reallocate those funds to someone else, or do they just go back into the city general fund? What happens if this process doesn't work for a particular agency? Or has that ever happened?
Don't believe this that has happened in the social service realm, but with our other grants that are federal, we would allocate a percentage based on what they already get.
Okay.
And allocate that back out to the agencies that were able to provide that.
But truthfully, for the most part, if that has happened, it's been 1 or 2 over a number of years, correct?
I can't remember any, so I'm sorry.
That's what I meant. It hasn't happened. What happens is they just suffer along with late reports and poor reports, and the idea of this process was that this process should push up that information.
Right, it would show up in the score
It should.
Sure.
the following
Okay.
year because their performance over the past year is included in this grading metrics.
As long as we have carefully assessed the description of need and outcomes and the measures that they've chosen to use.
So we should be cognizant then as we read through this is some sort of a forecast of what we would expect their performance this year to look like, given their performance historically.
And if we're concerned about that, then just continuing to fund on a percentage increase that doesn't address the issue of.
And now you're seeing where I'm going. Yep. Yep. Yep.
We did build into the RFP for this year the option for, I forget how it's phrased, but if there were some issues that needed to be addressed, that this council could, this committee could, how's it read?
It is an appeal process. That's
Well,
what-
it's not the appeal process, it's the fact that if there were some circumstances that we felt
Oh,
needed to be addressed, we could do that.
that we did on this score sheet. The ECD committee may choose not to recommend any agency or programs, any new programs, or may fund programs with Provisio.
That's it.
Okay.
So we have some flexibility if there are some concerns that we have.
So did you guys choose not to recommend any because of poor performance?
Nope.
Okay. But there were some with poor performance?
Yeah, there were some with poor performance, but I think to give some credit, it's been a challenging few years. I think really we're starting to get it together and people know what we're needing, and
Okay.
it's majorly improved over the years. But I think sticking with our scores and that process is really our recommendation. Is we really think that this scoring metrics, the way it is effective.
Good enough for me. Actually, I can use the term good enough for government work officially now.
So just to clarify, if I'm understanding, we are stuck on 2 issues right now, the 75-25% rule for the emergency funding, and then the agencies that would be given under 10,000. Is that accurate? If we proceeded with option 1?
Correct. Correct.
Yes.
And then if there was, if we wanted to check perhaps most appropriately with staff about, had questions about any of the scoring or any of the considerations that they used.
What are the chances that your suggestion would fix the 75-25?
It would actually make it worse.
Oh, fabulous. Well,
The one that's below 10,000 is an emergency aid provider, so that would
okay.
decrease it even further.
so did we override the 75-25 rule last year?
That's what I just asked.
We did not.
We did not need to. We had a substantial increase in requests last year in that area.
I see, okay.
But the $10,000 floor,
Right.
just according to this, was not a hard and fast rule last year, or
Correct.
it was
Okay.
Yeah, but we still only
chosen not to
funded-
follow with according to the 15 allocations, there are what, 1,
6 or 7.
yeah, 2, 3, 4.
So we can choose to break that rule, but we can't choose to break the 75-25?
We can, if we don't have enough eligible applications, if we look at it that way,
Okay.
to fill it, then we just have to tell the council that that's
Okay.
what we found out of the cycle.
Oh, I see,
We could
okay.
still end up going forward as the
Mhm.
the proposal for next year, but,
Okay.
or we could choose to reserve dollars and do a reallocation fund or something like that if we felt like we needed that many dollars out. Emergency aid agencies are always running out of money.
Yeah, they are
Not-
indeed, yes.
You know, if it was a feeling that was
Mhm.
that strong, I'm sure we could figure that out.
Which, to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that's not a symptom of the scoring, but rather of the applications that were submitted, because we only had
Correct.
3
Correct.
that fell into that emergency aid category, so kind of,
And there was a plus or minus in there, you know, there's
Yeah.
been debate, of
Mhm.
course, about, you know, the balance, and which is important. The general consensus was that both were important. We certainly didn't want to just feed people fish and not teach them to fish,
Agreed.
those sorts of things.
Well, I would be interested in seeing your suggestion worked up, even though it sort of blows the 75-25 rule out of the water. I think that'd be an interesting approach to see.
So that being that we would ask the staff to
Drop.
readdress the option 1.
Well, I would keep option 1 and create a second option then that drops everything below 60, correct?
Okay.
And then raises everything that doesn't meet 10,000 to the 10,000 floor, right?
and to clarify, when you say drop everything that doesn't meet that 60% threshold in the scoring, do you mean they don't get any additional funding as per their request, or they don't get funded? Just to be clear.
Under that scenario, if I understand previously, it would mean they did not get funding.
That was the
Right.
proposal in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
We could just see
wanted
what
to
that
make
looked
sure I
like.
understood exactly what we were
If-
saying.
If you, I mean, it doesn't mean we have to do it.
Hmm.
See what it
We
looks like.
we can certainly work that up, though, so that you guys can see it.
Yeah, okay, so it would be to leave option 1 as it is, understanding that it would not meet the 75-25 test and
Or the
the
10,000
10,000
test. Right.
Okay.
So then the second option would meet the 10,000 test, but would not meet the 75-25 test.
Right.
And so then my next question is, should we try and redo option 1 so that it meets the 75-25 test without meeting the 10,000 test?
Or we could also leave them separate and look at the prevention and counseling against the 75% number.
Mhm.
Well, sitting here thinking this through, we need 117,500 is what you just said. We have 48,917 if we allocated that additional, 52, 42, whatever it is, to the agencies that scored well, then we could get our numbers back up to the 25% and just not have money going to an agency that didn't score well.
In the other group you're
In
talking
the,
about.
I'm talking, yeah, in the
You would
emergency
shift
side.
those
Okay.
dollars over to emergency aid, spread it out between those, and then
Yeah.
take it away from the pool,
Yes.
and we
So
would
maybe
be
that's our third option then.
forced to.
I can do that.
So
Take
that
a
would give us
threshold.
3 options. That would give us the current option 1 as presented, option 2, which is what Mr. Schum suggested, and then the third option would be that.
Okay.
I think that would give us,
And that 60% is still the threshold.
On
The
option
ones
2.
that have to,
Yes.
on the, well, it's 2 or 3. 2 for today or 3 total.
Right.
Not, you're talking about
Whatever
the
it is.
2 that have been discussed right now, not the one that staff brought. But,
well, the one the staff brought would still stay option 1,
Right.
and Mr. Schum's would be option 2.
And
And
then
then doing the reallocation to meet the 75-25 that we just discussed would be option 3.
And then, but that would have to include that, it would have to include some kind of a
Oh, this is true,
threshold
to get
where
the extra funding, yes.
Because
Yeah,
otherwise-
yeah, okay, so, yeah,
Which-
do the 60%, then I agree.
There's not enough.
Oh, even with that?
Well, there may be if we throw, if there's a threshold that if they didn't score at a 60 or above, then they're not eligible for funding in 16, then
Okay.
it fixes our problem. But if you want to fund everybody, no, there's not enough money.
Well, no, I agree.
No matter how we
So
slice
do the
it.
60% cutoff for option 3 then, I think, and then that'll give us a basis to start discussing performance.
One more time. So you want us to, for option 3, you want 25% of the total definitely given to the emergency aid group, and however that shakes out in terms of the dollars that go to those 3 agencies, whatever's left gets split between all of the other service providers that we're categorizing as counseling and prevention and counseling services, and under that scenario, there'd have to be a threshold, which 60% is what we're saying it would be, that if they're 60% or above, they're included, and we figure out what those dollars break
Well,
out as.
And maybe we're making this too complicated.
Yes.
So what I would say is, make the 75-25 rule hard and fast, and then just allocate down
Until we run out of
until
money.
you run out of money. And
Okay,
if
gotcha.
it's 60%, great. If it's 75%, we only have so much money. And then that'll give us 3 options. We can start to work back and forth and try to ascertain whether or not
Thank
we're
you.
able to not fund
Yes.
people and not hurt
I can do
things.
that.
So,
Alan, I don't know, I mean, we have a lot of new council members. We haven't run this by them. There's generally been very solid support for social services, but, we don't have to spend it all either. What happened last year was that there was discomfort, and we said, well, this is the test year, and so money got added with the support of the council.
I would be interested to see if it would be possible to run an option 4, which would be very similar to Mr. Jensen's proposal, except the additional money needed to make up that 25% would be held in reserve, as I think that was mentioned a little bit earlier, for the council or the city to use as needed as emergency organizations run out of funds. Is that too
I
far
think it's a
left field?
possibility. One of the things we talked about a lot at the council meeting when we raised the water rates was to make sure that we had enough money in the utility funds to make sure we helped low-income families.
but
with
in
the
option
utility
3,
bills.
we don't have extra money,
Yeah.
do we? Because we run until we run out, correct?
What you're
What I'm
saying is
saying-
25%, the
For
score is
emergency,
applied,
yes.
and then whatever's left of that $117,000 pool
I see.
Exactly.
I see.
sits
Okay.
there
Held in
as
reserve for
additional
emergency.
emergency aid funding that could be
Sure.
granted in 16.
That could be applied for as needs arise.
That would make sense.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So if heaven forbid we had a tornado or a flood, and we had an emergency organization come to the council and say, we need X number of
Yeah.
dollars, the council would have that sitting there
Yeah.
for a true emergency.
No,
So
that
We
makes
can bring
sense.
that to you as well, and you can
Okay.
look at what all of those scenarios look like.
I think that's a good idea.
You're clear on that one? I'm not.
I am. He's
got it.
saying we take the $117,000 25% pool, we apply the scoring as it came out this year, and that equals their funding. And if there's any of this 117 left, it doesn't get bumped down to the other pool. It just sits there as emergency aid funding that would be available in 2016 for new applications.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, glad you got it.
All right.
I
Is
was
that
watching
right?
you.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got, we will, when we reconvene, you'll bring those 4 options to us, and we'll be able to see how they look.
Sure.
Are you in a position where, it would need to still be confidential at the committee level, where those could come to us prior to the meeting?
What time's the meeting on Thursday?
9:30.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, if you can get them ready, that would allow us to kind of spend a little
Okay.
time with them and think about it.
It'd probably be the end of the day tomorrow, if that's okay
That's
with
sure.
fine.
I mean,
Okay.
essentially, it's the same core numbers you've already done. It's
Yeah.
just moving some of it around. So yeah, then we could look over them Wednesday night and be ready to go with the aid of coffee on Thursday morning.
I
So
have
we got
one-
Jado
I have
on
one more
Wednesday
question.
night.
So on that scenario number 4, where we're saying the 25%, the 117, the scores are applied, the funding's broken out, anything that's extra is a pool available for new applications in 16, and then that still doesn't address the issue that on the prevention and counseling applications, we have more applications than we have money, so are we still going back to the 60% threshold for that group?
That is the only difference from
Well,
option
I'd say
Option
on that, we just
3.
have to run them down until we run out of
Until we
money,
run out.
correct? As long as we
Okay.
don't go below. I mean, make the floor 60, but then just run it down until we're out of money.
Okay.
And if we're out of money at 70, we're out of money at 70. Do you agree?
I don't have a problem with seeing that
Okay.
scenario.
Great, sounds good to me.
Clear? Okay. How are, I don't know how many of the applications you each were able to get through. Another thing that would be helpful, if it doesn't make Corey's head explode, is that if people have questions about any of the scores, that we would get them to her soon as well. I don't know if that is reasonable for you all, and whether we would do it by category or by the whole book.
Deputy Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
I have comments on each different spreadsheet that was not sent to you on each of the areas where they did not receive all their points with comments from the review panel. I
Okay.
can send that spreadsheet, and that would hopefully help
That'd be great.
That would be helpful?
get that started. And if you have further questions beyond that, then you can certainly email us.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll see how we can get through that between now and.
Okay.
Great. Given that, I don't know if we want to, again, we need to do due diligence on these applications and so on. Is there any sense on the part of this group at this point in the discussions that you would want to have any other parties, the external parties or whatever it's called here, expert advisors, have a look at these as well, or have you even been through them enough to be sure?
I mean, I think I'm comfortable at this point with what the staff has done to give us. I mean, again, it's so terrible to reduce this to a business decision, but it has to be in order for it to be fair and equitable.
Exactly.
And, you know, based on the numbers and what I understand of the process, I think I've got what I need to make a decision on my end.
I would agree with that. We also have a condensed time frame, and I
Yes.
don't think we could get an expert opinion by Thursday morning.
No. And we do, I mentioned it earlier, I really think that if we feel like we need another 3 weeks, if we need it, I think we can take it. So more important to take the time that you all feel we need to do due diligence on the process than to try and be done by Monday.
And the flip side of the coin is, where are we going to find a nonprofit expert that's not already requesting funds? Because that would be a conflict of interest. So we'd have to reach out to a nonprofit that is intimately familiar with many of the nonprofits in the community that's not on the list. And I'm not sure who that would be at this point. So,
Well, you've mentioned, for instance, even United Way, because they do an outcomes-based process and also
Yeah.
have a more global
and that's
picture,
correct.
possibly, or
However,
at
they're
least
on the
something to
list.
reinforce.
So
Well,
that
they're
would be-
not.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're on their successful connections.
Oh,
Yep. So,
True.
Yep, so that would be a conflict of interest.
okay, good point.
I would suggest we reevaluate how we feel after Thursday morning's proposals are in front of us.
Okay. Shall we just,
Can I ask a question? And I apologize to back it up, but an expert opinion on on this process?
No, on the
More
work they
on-
do in the community,
yeah,
not on the process. That we couldn't bring an outside
Not on the
expert in
process.
to review your process, having not been intimately familiar with your process. But as to whether or not they're able to execute the work in the community at the level that it would need to be done to move the needle, as they say.
yeah, I think that's why it was built in there, was the issue of just a little broader perspective in case it made a difference on looking at whether an outcome was well stated, whether the outputs and outcomes were meaningful and so on. That being very important to what we were trying to do.
But the fact that you guys have spent so much time with these agencies and worked with them so closely in the recent past, I mean, that's essentially, it's the same, your feedback would be what I would expect, similar to what we would get from an expert that's actually in the industry, just with your exposure to those agencies and seeing how they've worked in the past.
Thank you. These guys have years of experience in working with these.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Part of our charge and then part of this is exactly the agenda that the group looked at last year, was that this group got to decide whether they wanted to add anybody in or not. So we needed to address that, and that's it.
Yep.
Okay, well, we will not do that this year. We will ask scoring questions if people have them of Corey. She will send out the docs. We will work on Thursday, looking at the 4 models. make a decision on how we want to do it, and then we will decide at that point whether we're ready to go.
Great.
We have often, we have typically, if we had time available, opened up for comments from those in attendance. Does that suit you?
That's wonderful.
Yep.
Does anybody have comments for us before we break? Okay. Thank you so much for all that you do and for coming. And we will reconvene and continue doing our work on Thursday morning at 9:30 here. You are all welcome to attend. You don't need to.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Other things today from you all as committee members?
I'm good.
We stand adjourned.
Yep.